to FutureScape Virtual. Today I'm joined by Ruth Knight, who is the Principal Policy and Programme Officer Green Infrastructure at the Greater London Authority. And today we're discussing the recently published report on London Green Space Commission. Afternoon, Ruth, and thank you very much for joining us today. If I could just start, just to ask a bit of questions about the report then. Who commissioned it, why it was commissioned, when it was commissioned and carried out?
Yeah, absolutely. So the report was only published in August, but the commission started last year in April 2019. It came about as a commitment from the Mayor's London Environment Strategy, and there were 14 commissioners. The commission was chaired by the Deputy Mayor for Energy and Environment, Shirley Rodriguez, and the Vice Chair was Councillor Julian Bell, representing London councils. So in addition to them, there were 12 unpaid, openly recruited commissioners from across not only the sector, but from outside the sector, bringing in different points of view, some of whom will be familiar to many of the audience, I'm sure. The commission sat for 18 months, slightly extended, as you'd imagine, by COVID. So we had 6 meetings in person. And during that time, there was evidence taken, written evidence, there was evidence in person, there were a couple of borough workshops. The whole point of the commission was to look at how boroughs could be supported in the future management and funding of their park services. And it was a very borough-focused exercise, but also with the aim to build on the existing work that had already taken place. So obviously there's a lot of background on the benefits of green space, how they can be better managed and funded that came before. So the commissioners were very aware that there was a need to come up with a small number of achievable but ambitious recommendations and get the buy-in from London councils, from the GLA and from the wider sector behind those recommendations. So yeah, so we did a lot of consultation, a lot of engagement, looking across various sectors, not just at the green space sector. So specifically drawing in borough officers from highways, from health, from regeneration, to get that cross-sector view.
There's a couple of things that, as I was reading it, that came to my mind, and I guess one of them, it felt, and I don't know if it's just the way that it's written, that there was a real lack of understanding of the value that green space does bring to the community as a whole. Was that there beforehand, or was it brought out by this report?
I think it's something that's been appreciated for a while, and of course the report was written pre-COVID, so I think we're in quite an interesting place now, because I think the value of green space has come out so strongly through lockdown in the press, and I know the Prime Minister at one point even referred to it as essential infrastructure, which was obviously one of those moments where you feel, oh, that's good, that's
yeah, like
that. But I think actually how that translates into funding is the question. I mean, there's a general appreciation it's good for your health to be in green space. We have a huge amount of evidence to show it is. We know that green space is good for climate resilience. We know that it provides better social integration. We know that it's important for a healthy city, but that doesn't translate into the funding that's needed. So that's why that sort of was brought out in the report. And that's why the various figures from things like the Natural Capital report around the fact that every £1 spent on green space provides £27 of value for Londoners was drawn out. That need to champion green space, especially across other sectors, I think was really something the commissioners felt very strongly there was still a need to do.
So with the report again, it was fundamentally trying to make sure that there was the money to do what was needed to do to continue it, to grow it, and to, I guess, where we talk about the social responsibility and the social access to parks, was it all parts to sort of really prove the value, prove the point, and then to get the funding?
Yes, exactly. So I mean, I think there are a number of things. So it was around the fact there's still a need to champion the value. There's around the fact that the funding is not there. There's the piece around this fact that often the skills are not there. There's an issue around skills, and these are all things that came out strongly during the evidence and the conversations had by the commissioners, as well as having come out previously in various iterations. So I think the question was how then, what can be realistically done to address those big main elements. And that's why the Commission made the recommendations it did around a convening Centre for Excellence, the need for the Green Space Investment Fund, and this wider piece around the Future Skills Programme.
Sorry, and so all those, I think we're coming to just on the funding then.
Yes.
How much of a gap was there, and where who's going to be responsible, I guess, for filling that gap if they do?
Yeah, can't take full responsibility for filling the gap. It's a substantial gap. If you look in the last in the last 10 years, there's been over 30% reduction in green space funding, public green space funding in London alone. But I think during that time, the population's risen considerably. So and also we're looking at a wider funding gap in the public sector. So I think there's often a feeling that local authorities should spend more on their green space, which is absolutely fair and fine, and a feeling that the green space parks should be statutory. Again, is a very strong argument that came through in many of the written evidence pieces given to the Commission. I think the question is, do local authorities even have the funding to support the statutory services, let alone ones that aren't statutory, like parks? There's been a £4 billion cut in local services for London over the last 10 years.
Yeah.
So we're really challenging, and that was the conversation before COVID. So we're even more challenging background now. So we have to be really creative in where that funding can be found. And obviously there's a role for more local authority funding for park services. There's a big role for more government funding for park services. But I think we also need to look at other ways to draw in funding from other sectors as well.
And where do you think the strongest argument is in terms of that funding? And is it in the benefits in terms of mental health, which can be improved? Is it in terms of capturing carbon, etc., and getting to the targets that have been set? Where do you see the main thrust for the argument?
I think annoyingly it's going to be across all of those, isn't it? Before COVID, we would talk a lot around the health side, and up in Camden and Islington, there's a project, part of a lottery-funded Future Parks Accelerator, which is looking specifically at whether park services can be reframed as a public health asset under the public health lead there, which is a really interesting project and reflects that need to think a bit more holistically and think of parks as an asset around health rather than just a recreational area. And I think something similar around climate resilience is coming out quite strongly in a lot of borough climate action plans. We're seeing that shift in emphasis, seeing green space as a climate action asset almost as well. So it's coming through in a number of places. I think there's also something around the benefits for biodiversity of green space that's coming through quite a lot nationally and internationally in terms of potential around funding, but that feels a little difficult to pin down just at the moment. But you've seen, I think it was yesterday, the Chancellor announced a new green sovereign bond. So there's a sort of movement in terms of green finance at the moment, which, many people say we've had these conversations for a long time, no extra funding has come through, but I think we're slowly moving slightly more place in terms of drawing in some of that extra funding.
And the other thing, I guess, is the social equality then in the areas where there aren't the green spaces, and how that's going to be used. Is that part of the argument as well?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think we do need to think beyond parks, obviously, and think about the wider green infrastructure and how we make the benefits of green space available to a large number of a lot of that's around urban greening, and obviously there are planning tools to help with that, and London has very good, strong planning policy on that. But I think there are great opportunities to work much more closely with housing associations, with private green space managers, and to draw that conversation together, which I suppose is why the Centre for Excellence is quite an interesting idea, because it's talking not only to boroughs but also to wider green space managers, and bringing that collective pool together to actually ask for that funding and be ready to ask that funding from different places.
So talk a bit more about the idea then. There's this area of excellence, and how it's going to work. What in an ideal world, how it work, how it's funded, yeah. how it's going to have the skilled people that need to manage that.
Yeah, so I mean the commissioners look quite carefully at whether to set up something new, and you could hear the sort of collective heart sinking at the idea of another organisation. So there was an agreement that actually building on an existing organisation made the most sense, and having worked really closely with Parks for London, it made total sense for Parks for London to evolve into the Centre for Excellence. Parks for London already have a number of supporters. Most boroughs support Parks for London. We also have contractors involved, independent parks trusts. Some of the big players like the Royal Parks are all members at the moment. So that made a lot of sense to build on that expertise, but also to make sure that we were adding something extra in addition to what Parks for London already do, and bringing extra resources in. So it's a slow process. It's not going to sort of magically appear as a new organisation overnight, but it's a commitment for the GLA and for London councils to work closely with Parks for London to build up that resource. And when we had some research done as part of the commission into what a good convening, coordinating organisation would look like, it actually suggested that it shouldn't get too large in terms of number of staff. It should keep it sort of a maximum 5 staff to keep it flexible and agile, and able to adapt. So that's what we'd be looking to grow towards. And in terms of funding, there's 3 elements to the funding. First, there's actually going out and getting funding for Parks for London as a Centre for Excellence, which is quite a traditional model of simply going to the different sectors that we think would fund it, and the funders that we already work with. There's a slightly longer term piece, which is around, again, drawing together funders we work with already to work with them on a sort of mid-term funded piece, which is around both Centre for Excellence and then giving out some money for sort of strategic aims. So things around, for example, supporting boroughs on green infrastructure strategies would be an obvious one. And then there's a longer term piece, which is the sort of long-term sustainable funding that we hope to achieve through the Green Space Investment Fund, which is a much more difficult thing to make happen, obviously, but something we're working really closely with the Green Finance Institute on, and hoping to draw something together that would be a sustainable fund that could then continue to give out.
And with the Centre of Excellence, what sort of influence would they have then with the authorities in each of the different regions in terms of saying this is what needs to be done, and again, that debate on what people will spend and won't spend, and what they see the value and they don't see the value. Where how would that sit?
Yeah, I mean, that's always obviously we're dealing with an interesting beast in London with so many boroughs, and everybody wants, and rightly wants, to have their own direction. I think what's interesting about Parks for London is that it's shown its real benefit over lockdown in drawing people together and convening and seeing the opportunities. So it's building on much of the good work it's done before with the Good Parks report, and if you're not familiar with that, I'd go and have a look, because that's really useful in the way that it scores boroughs across 10 criteria, including things like strategic direction, sustainability, user feedback, and is a really helpful political tool to score boroughs, and boroughs who come top in that are often very pleased with that, understandably. So there's an opportunity for Parks for London as a centre for excellence to increase the amount of sort of peer-to-peer review and support between boroughs. It's an opportunity for it to champion the benefits across the different sectors that we looked at by bringing out those benefits, engaging with political decision makers on those, championing projects like the Future Parks Accelerator, Parks for Health work I mentioned earlier in Camden Islington, and also bringing in a sort of expertise around particular issues that are flagged up as being particular challenges across a large number of boroughs. So every year there's a survey of members for Parks for London that flags up particular things. So whether that is something around skills, whether it's something around waste management at the moment is obviously a very crucial one. It's around sort of use of IT and data and clever solutions or innovations, or areas around that, or disability access, that Parks for London can then draw in experts around that and provide specific guidance that then gets used and replicated across many boroughs. So there's a huge opportunity to build on what it already does and make it even more helpful.
And again, in the report, that it's pushed towards a shortage in terms of the skills. And I know as we're out talking to people, it's over the last 10, 15 years, the way that maybe even longer than that now, 20 years, that the way that parks have been managed and ran and things like that, there's less and less people being trained, people understanding, and the skill levels are getting, as people are getting older and retiring, we're not really filling them. Is that a strong part that did come from the report?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we did a bit of research on the skills situation at the moment, and obviously there's quite a lot of background information already available as well. And as you say, exactly, so the aging of the workforce, difficulty filling vacancies is something that's been reported very widely from boroughs. There are a number of things that were recommended through the report to start to tackle that, and it's not something that's obviously going to change again overnight, but a couple of things that came out were around the lack of really clear career pathway, the fact that the sector is often seen as rather unattractive, and that's particularly, I guess, when you look at it against something like the construction sector. And the commissioners were really interested in the Mayor's Construction Academy and how that had worked in terms of bringing together different trainers and providers from across London, and sort of creating a framework around that, having a quality mark for particular courses. And I think there are some things that could really interestingly be brought across, good practice from the construction sector. But there is certainly, and having looked across at the opportunities there are for training, it can be quite fragmented and difficult to find those opportunities. And also where those opportunities are, there was quite strong feedback that those courses were delivered either in the wrong place, so not close enough to site, they were too long, or they weren't seen as relevant. So I think there are opportunities to provide shorter courses, opportunities around CPD, looking at future pressures. So for instance, around climate resilience, some of the technical skills around sustainable drainage, for example, are needed. And also when you're looking at work that's being done nationally by APSI and others, I don't know if you've seen it, but there's a fantastic graphic of, what an old style park manager was expected to do and what a park manager is expected to do now. And you get this sort of, they've got it as a flower, but it's got sort of all these different things around the outside, events management, commercial negotiation, volunteer management. There's a huge amount of extra things that are expected. And when you're looking at sort of decreasing borough budgets and park services managers having to take on a huge amount of extra work and different sectors as well. I've heard people saying they've been given, the library sector, for example. It's a different skill set required at that level. Sorry.
I was going to say, it's quite interesting because that expansion of the job and the fact that it brings in so many facets of what the UK need to do and achieve, in a way, should encourage people to apply and develop and grow,
Yeah.
shouldn't it, in a way, rather than maybe, or now I've got so much, it's just trying to make sure that it's how it's packaged and promoted.
I think absolutely. I think there's and how you get there. I mean, do you come in from other sectors? What's that transfer between sectors like? Where are those skill sets, and how do you, often with some of the apprenticeships, so for example with the Landscape Institute, you can get quite high level apprenticeship offers, and then there's a bit of a gap, and we've been working quite closely with them on their level 3 apprenticeship that they are promoting, and trailblazer apprenticeships that are coming through, promising around that sort of technician level. And then there's a big potential around pre-apprenticeship and bringing new people into the sector who don't see it as an opportunity or something particularly interesting. So, for example, recently I've been talking a lot to future gardeners who work in Southwark, who have a really promising, well, it's not promising, it's really good. It's been running for years. And then some people choose to go on then to other apprenticeships. And they have a 76% success rate into employment, which is really exciting. And what they've been doing is working with a really good partnership. So they work very closely with developers, with the Royal Parks, with Grosvenor, with the Chelsea Physics Garden. They have a whole range of and employers, and they work with them, and people who come from a wide variety of backgrounds. Some come out of homeless shelters. They go directly to people, engage them, support them on that process, and they're getting a lot of sort of new and enthusiastic people through into the sector, which also helps tackle some issues around sector diversity, which is very, very strongly in the skills reports as well. So I think there is something there around making a career pathway clearer, making the sector seem more attractive, which we know is and also at placement level and sort of pulling people into the sector, giving those opportunities.
A lot of the challenges you talk about there, and certainly in terms of recruiting, are the same in the private sector as you're talking about. The other thing I always think about parks is the outsourcing of the maintenance. And what does the report feel about that then? Is that a good, positive? Is it a not so good? Is there any evidence either way?
I mean, I think that's a really tricky one. I mean, it's something that comes up from time to time, and it really depends on each borough has a different approach to it. And there wasn't any sort of clear steer about which route works better that came out of the commission. I mean, I think there are some really interesting examples of where park services and are taking over housing association green space to manage that, and I think that's quite interesting when it comes to sort of the opportunities around reaching people who might not necessarily be using parks, bringing green space out to a wider number of people. I think there's quite interesting opportunities that brings up, that obviously also links back into sort of more integral green infrastructure strategy as well, gives the opportunity for the borough to look at that. But of course, many contractors have really good training and skill development programs as well. So I think it's really hard to make a call either way. It's pretty split across London.
And then the other thing, I guess it was in 2019, there was a lot of press about people paying to use parks, and I think the park run type idea came through and all that. And again, what your feelings on that? And is that a no? It should be free, people to use it.
That came up a lot in the report, and particularly through the evidence as well. I mean, it's a really hard thing, isn't it? Parks are contested space. Anywhere that's free and open to use, there's going to have a lot of requests. And I know many boroughs were quite dependent on some of that event income coming through, and this has been a very hard year as a result. I mean, it's like anything, there has to be a balance, doesn't there? It's about communication, it's about making sure that the whole park is not closed off for long periods of time. There's a lot of good practice about how to do those events in a sustainable way. I think it comes back to this core of this idea that parks are free, in terms of financially free, which I think is dangerous. So push everybody into the parks during lockdown, for example, but don't then think about the extra money it will cost for local authorities to gather up that rubbish. I think that there has to be an understanding that parks need investment to carry on being useful green spaces that they are. And that's where it gets to an interesting conversation. And I think there's also, when you look at events, I think there's something around how that communication happens with the community around that park and green spaces. There's been some really interesting developments, I guess, around volunteers and the role that friends groups play, and increasingly friends groups are playing a more important role in maintaining and improving green space. So that relationship with the community is really important. I think that again, that's something where the Centre for Excellence has an opportunity to support boroughs in creating really effective friends forums, because some of that management of volunteers can be really time intensive, but done successfully, as it is in many boroughs, it can pay off.
So the Centre of Excellence, and how long until you can see that playing a central role?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a slow process. We've got off to a good start already. So I mean, actually, if anybody watching, it feels like being involved in any way, there are 3 trustee vacancies online on the website, but also through Parks for London now, which is about bringing in sort of additional expertise into the existing board to reflect that new sort of cross-sector working. And we've already started a sort of cross-group London Councils, GLA, Parks for London, London Environment Directors Network, CLOA, the Chief Leisure Officers Association, as an advisory core steering group for that. We are going to be slower than we might have been otherwise because of the funding issues around COVID. But we're hoping to get something up and running by the end of next year, is what the commissioners committed to. So we have a
and you know, I think all the bad things of COVID, but do you think it might have strengthened the arm of the report and again really emphasised the value of the green space?
Absolutely, it's a mixed blessing, isn't it? I mean, yeah, I think it's strengthened the arse, but it's also brought some really interesting conversations, I think, around the skills side as well, because the interest in the within the GLA, there are missions around recovery, and the Green New Deal is a big part of that, and that's around the people who've been moving into the green sector, and how we can provide through the adult education budget those courses that will fit people who want to move across and get transferable skills, come into the green sector. And we like to think of that as a green as in the literally green, the green space sector as well. And we're working closely with our skills team to sort of bring in that side. So there is this real interest in training and skills. Quite a few people interested in moving sectors, I think, as a result of the lockdown and being at home. And also the opportunities around the value of green space. But equally, of course, the fact that there will be a decrease in funding in some areas.
Sometimes, I really appreciate your time, Ruth. That's going on. Just in summary, then, I guess, you know, what's your hopes and your desires for this report to have achieved, and sort of timing on when you're hoping that there'll be some real tangible benefits?
Yeah, well, I think we can get some clear things started fairly soon. So I mean, we'll get the trustee board, so we get the Centre for Excellence sort of evolving very soon. We'll look at sort of an expert panel, be drawing in those before probably spring next year. We are already looking at working potentially with Future Gardeners and the Landscape Institute around the skills side, so something around a placement scheme and building on that. And we're working closely with our wider GLA skills team on the green skills as a whole, and the adult education budget and what role that can play in that. So as I said, I mean, we've got until the end of next year to make some really tangible, clear progress. But I think we'll be starting to see some before that. When it comes to the Green Space Investment Fund, that's going to be the trickiest piece.
Yeah.
But again, that's something we're working really closely with the Green Finance Institute on. And I think we're really lucky actually that that's worked at the same, that's all come together at the same point.
Yeah.
So we can actually be part of something that's a much wider, more ambitious scheme. Because I think the most dangerous thing we can do is pick around the edges. We need to go for something quite ambitious here. And certainly what the commissioners have set us an ambitious target, and we need to step up to that. So it's going to be an interesting time, but I'm positive about the benefits and the opportunities there are to bring that greater cohesion to the sector in London. I think we have to be fairly realistic about what we can achieve, but I think we can definitely achieve something useful and tangible.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, and really good luck. And anyone in the industry can get involved and get help, then I'll point them in your direction. But
yeah, please do. Please, look for the trustee role, and we would definitely be looking to sort of widen the supporting group and bring in more people beyond boroughs. So yes, watch this space.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ruth. Thank you very much.